Hey friends, welcome to my YouTube channel. Don't forget to press the bell icon like thumbs up, share up right arrow, and subscribe red heart.
What happens aback one of Hollywood's most abrupt actors sits bottomward with a television host accepted for his aggressive questioning style? Well, you're about to find out, and assurance me, it gets intense fast. Accomplish abiding to hit that subscribe button and be the animadversion beneath because this adventure is activity to draft your mind. Samuel L. Jackson absolved into the Good Morning America flat that morning expecting a accepted promotional interview for his latest film. The legendary amateur accepted for his commanding presence both on and off-screen had done hundreds of these interviews over his decadesal continued career. But what he didn't expect was George Stephanopoulos in one of his best confrontational moods. The tension started architecture alike afore the cameras formed backstage. Jackson could hear Stephanopoulos talking to his producers about absent to dig deeper than the accepted boner questions. "I'm tired of these softball interviews." Stephanopoulos was adage his voice carrying that accurate bend that his colleagues had abstrused to accept as trouble brewing. Aback Jackson took his seat aloft from the host, the atmosphere in the flat acquainted different. The accepted pre-in baby allocution was clipped and perfunctory. Stephanopoulos barely looked up from his addendum as he adjusted his tie and arrested his earpiece. The crew seemed to faculty article was off, too, casual nervously amid the two men as they able for what they thought would be a standard entertainment segment. "We're alive in 30 seconds, the attic administrator announced. And that's aback Stephanopoulos finally made eye acquaintance with Jackson. There was something algid in his gaze, something that adapted this wasn't activity to be the affable babble the amateur had been promised. Acceptable morning. I'm George Stephanopoulos and we're actuality with Samuel L. Jackson. The host began once they were live, his able smile not absolutely extensive his eyes. Samuel, thanks for abutting us this morning to talk about your new film. Acceptable morning, George, Jackson replied, clearing back in his armchair with that characteristic confidence that had fabricated him a screen legend. Happy to be here. But Stephanopoulos wasn't absorbed in pleasantries. Almost immediately, he shifted into advance mode. Samuel, before we allocution about the movie, I appetite to address article that's been bothering me about your contempo comments regarding the blur industry. You've been quite vocal about assertive issues, and frankly, some bodies are analytic whether you're the adapted actuality to be making these statements. Jackson's eyebrows shot up. This wasn't what they discussed with the producers. I'm sorry. What absolutely are you apropos to, George? Well, you've fabricated some pretty strong accusations about how the industry operates, about candor and representation, but aback I attending at your career, you've been one of the biggest beneficiaries of that aforementioned arrangement you're now criticizing. Isn't that a bit hypocritical? The flat fell silent, except for the low hum of the cameras. Jackson leaned advanced slightly, his voice actual calm, but with an edge that anyone who knew him would recognize as a admonishing sign. George, I anticipate you might appetite to analyze what you beggarly by that because it sounds like you're suggesting I don't accept the adapted to speak about issues I've experienced firsthand. Stephanopoulos apprenticed on, seemingly absent to the dangerous territory he was entering. I'm just saying that for Edition who's made millions of dollars from this industry, complaining about it seems a bit rich, don't you think? You've been in some of the bigger blockbusters of all time. How absolutely accept you been disadvantaged? Hold up, Jackson said, his voice dropping to that low abstinent accent that had abashed endless characters on screen. Are you actively sitting there trying to acquaint me that because I've been successful, I should aloof shut up about the problems I've apparent and experienced? That because I've fabricated money, racism doesn't exist? The host shifted uncomfortably, but angled down. I'm not saying racism doesn't exist, Samuel. I'm saying that maybe Edition in your position isn't the best agent for these issues. Maybe Edition who hasn't benefited so abundant from the arrangement would have added credibility. Jackson's jaw tightened visibly. The cameras caught every micro-announcement as his famous intensity began to build. More credibility? George? Let me explain something to you. The actuality that I've achieved success doesn't abolish the years of actuality TYP cast, of actuality told I was to this or to that, of watching less talented actors get roles because they fit a assertive look. Success doesn't immunize you from discrimination. It just gives you a belvedere to allocution about it. But Stephanopoulos wasn't backing down. If anything, he seemed energized by Jackson's reaction. But don't you think that your success adventure actually contradicts your narrative? Actuality, you are one of the accomplished grossing actors of all time, sitting in a television studio announcement edition a loft film. Where absolutely is the systematic oppression in that? The catechism afraid in the air like a challenge. Jackson stared at Stephanopoulos for a continued moment, and viewers at home could about see the temperature in the allowance dropping. When he assuredly spoke, his articulation carried the affectionate of quiet ascendancy that made people listen. George, I'm activity to give you one adventitious to amend the direction of this chat because adapted now your oral-like edition who's never had to action for annihilation in your life. You appetite to allocution about my success? Let's talk about how I had to assignment alert as hard for bisected the acceptance for the first 20 years of my career. Let's talk about the scripts I was offered that were annihilation but stereotypes. Let's talk about the affairs area I was told I was too intimidating, too urban, too whatever cipher chat they were application that week. Stephanopoulos leaned back slightly, but his articulation remained challenging. But that's age-old history now, isn't it? The industry has changed. You've been in some of the most prestigious films of the aftermost 2 decades. Marvel movies, Quentin Tarantino films, Aloft Flat Pictures. How is that not progress? Progress. Jackson's articulation rose slightly, just enough for anybody in the flat to feel the shift. George, do you perceive how many times I've been the abandoned black actor in those big account films? Do you know how abounding times I've absolved onto sets area bodies affected I was there to deliver cafeteria instead of bare lines? Progress isn't one actuality breaking through barriers. It's disturbing those barriers bottomward for everyone. The host seemed to faculty he was accident ascendancy of the interview, but instead of pulling back, he pushed harder. Samuel, with all due respect, you're starting to sound like a addition who's attractive for problems where they don't abide anymore. Maybe the absolute affair is that some bodies just don't appetite to accept that things have gotten better. That was the moment everything changed. Jackson's eyes flashed with article that made everyone in the flat aback, very aware of why he'd been so convincing, playing alarming characters throughout his career. Aback he spoke, his articulation was baleful quiet. George, I need you to be accurate about your next words because you're about to cross a band that you absolutely don't appetite to cross. But Stephanopoulos either didn't hear the admonishing in Jackson's articulation or chose to avoid it completely. The host had acutely absently that this was his moment to accomplish a name for himself by taking bottomward one of Hollywood's biggest stars, and he wasn't activity to back down. Now, Samuel, I anticipate what's happening here is absolutely what I'm talking about, Stephanopoulos said with a condescending smile that fabricated the aggregation members' exchange of frayed glances. The moment someone asks you boxy questions about your positions, you resort to intimidation tactics. Isn't that exactly the affectionate of behavior that gives your critics ammunition? Jackson sat perfectly still for a moment, processing what he aloof heard. The flat was so quiet you could apprehend the ventilation system bustling overhead. Aback he finally responded, his articulation had taken on that measured alarming affection that anyone familiar with his assignment would recognize. Intimidation tactics, Jackson repeated slowly, anniversary chat advised and precise. George, let me be clear about something. Me cogent you that you're about to cantankerous a band isn't intimidation. It's a courtesy. It's me giving you a adventitious to bethink that you're declared to be a professional journalist, not some abridged hack looking for a antic moment. Stephanopoulos's face ablaze slightly, but he apprenticed on. I'm allurement legitimate questions about your accessible statements. If you can't handle that affectionate of scrutiny, maybe you shouldn't be making those statements in the aboriginal place. Handle scrutiny? Jackson's beam was sharp and humorless. George, I've been handling analysis aback before you knew what a teleprompter was. But there's a difference amid accepted questions and what you're accomplishing adapted now, which is aggravating to delegitimize my experiences because they don't fit your comfortable narrative. The host leaned forward, sensing what he apprehension was an opening. Your adventures or your agenda? Because from area I'm sitting, it looks like your application your belvedere to advance a particular political viewpoint. And when someone challenges that, you get defensive. That's a back. Jackson's composure assuredly cracked. Just slightly, but abundant for everyone watching to see the beam of genuine anger in his eyes. Political viewpoint, George. Equality isn't a political viewpoint. It's an animal right. But I guess that's article you wouldn't understand. Sitting in your ivory tower, never accepting to anguish about whether you got a job because of your aptitude or because you fit someone's abstraction of what a person in your position should look like. Stephanopoulos bristled at the personal attack. Now, ascendancy on aloof a minute. I've formed adamantine to get area I am, and I don't acknowledge the implication that I haven't becoming my position. Oh, you don't acknowledge it? Jackson's articulation dripped with sarcasm. Well, brainstorm how I feel aback. You sit there and betoken that my decades of experience with bigotry don't matter because I eventually found success admitting it. The aberration is, I'm not analytic you're adapted to have your job. I'm analytic your competence to do it. The restriction in the studio had accomplished a breaking point. Producers were aimlessly whispering into their headsets and camera operators were zooming in to bolt every facial expression. This had gone far aloft a standard account and was rapidly becoming article abroad entirely. My competence. Stephanopoulos' articulation rose, his able address finally starting to crack. I've been accomplishing this job for decades. I've interviewed presidents, Apple leaders, Nobel Prize winners. I anticipate I apperceive how to conduct an interview. Jackson befuddled his head slowly, a Absathian smile arena at the corners of his mouth. George, interviewing presidents doesn't accomplish you presidential. And adapted now, you're acting like addition who's never been told no in his life. Throwing a tantrum because your bedfellow won't comedy forth with your little ambush. Ambush? Stephanopoulos attempt back. This is journalism, Samuel. This is what happens when accessible abstracts accomplish controversial statements. They get asked about them. If you can't handle that, maybe you should stick to account scripts instead of autograph ops. The insult afraid in the air like a slap. Jackson's eyes narrowed, and aback he spoke. His voice carried the affectionate of controlled acerbity that had fabricated him one of the best compelling actors of his generation. Did you just tell me to stick to account scripts? Jackson asked, his articulation so quiet that everyone in the flat had to ache to hear him. Did you absolutely aloof try to put me in my abode like some affectionate of performing monkey who should be grateful for the debris you bandy him? Stephanopoulos accomplished he'd gone too far, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. That's not what I said, and you know it. I'm adage that maybe entertainment abstracts should focus on entertainment instead of aggravating to be political commentators. Entertainment figures. Jackson's articulation was getting louder now, and there was no mistaking the acrimony architecture abaft it. George, I'm not a loof and ball figure. I'm a citizen. I'm a taxpayer. I'm a human actuality with eyes and an academician and 5 decades of activity experience. But you want to abate me to aloof an entertainer because it's easier for you to dismiss what I'm adage if you can convince people I don't accept the adapted to say it. The host was afraid now, chaplet of perspiration resting on his forehead despite the studio's air conditioning. Samuel, I anticipate you'll account things into this chat that aren't there. I'm artlessly aggravating to accept an honest altercation about your public statements. Honest. Jackson laughed, but there was no amusement in it. George, there's annihilation honest about what you're doing. You came into this account with an agenda, and that calendar was to make me attending like an affronted atramentus man who doesn't apperceive his place. Well, congratulations. You got bisected of it right. I am angry, but not for the reasons you think. Stephanopoulos tried to achieve ascendancy of the situation. I think we're accepting off clue here. Let's try to refocus on your new film, which is why you're here. But Jackson wasn't accepting it. No, George, let's not change the accountable now. You capital to have this conversation, so let's have it. You appetite to apperceive what makes me angry? It's sitting aloft from someone who has never had to action for respect, never had to prove himself aloft the accident of his birth, aggravating to lecture me about how I should acknowledge to discrimination. You appetite to apperceive what privilege looks like? It's the confidence to a quaint addition abroad that their lived adventures don't matter. The flat fell bashful. Again, but this time it was the blackout of shock rather than anticipation. Stephanopoulos opened his aperture to respond, but Jackson held up a duke to stop him. "I'm not finished," Jackson said, his voice carrying the affectionate of ascendancy that made people accept whether they capital to or not. "You asked me if I apprehension I was the right actuality to allege about these issues. Well, let me ask you something, George. What makes you anticipate you're the right actuality to acquaint me I'm not?" The question landed like a concrete blow. Stephanopoulos sat aback in his chair, finally appearing to apprehend that he was in over his head, but Jackson wasn't done with him yet. Stephanopoulos tried to balance his footing, but Jackson had seized complete ascendancy of the conversation. The host's carefully constructed persona was a rise under pressure, and anybody in the studio could see it accident in absolute time. "Samuel, I anticipate you're mischaracterizing what I'm aggravating to do here," Stephanopoulos said, his voice noticeably shakier than it had been at the alpha of the interview. "I'm just asking the questions that our viewers want answered." Jackson's acknowledgement was swift and devastating. "Your viewers, George, your admirers acquainted in to hear about a movie, not to watch you try to humiliate a bedfellow for your own ego. But since you brought up what bodies appetite to know, let me acquaint you what I anticipate they really appetite to know. They appetite to know why a allegedly able journalist thinks it's adapted to ambush someone who came actuality in acceptable faith." The host's face was now visibly red. A combination of embarrassment and anger. "This isn't an ambush. It's journalism. Real journalism asks adamantine questions. Hard questions." Jackson's articulation rose to a akin that fabricated the complete technician's W. "George, you haven't asked me a single adamantine catechism this absolute time. You've fabricated accusations. You've dismissed my experiences. And you've tried to blackout me. That's not journalism. That's aloof bad television." Stephanopoulos fabricated one aftermost desperate attempt to achieve control. "Samuel, I think you're actuality ever sensitive about this. Maybe if you could just answer the questions instead of attacking me personally, we could accept a productive conversation." That was the final straw. Jackson stood up so abruptly that his armchair formed backward. The abrupt movement causing anybody in the flat to jump. His arty figure cast a adumbration over the still-seated host as he looked bottomward at him with undisguised contempt. Ever sensitive. Jackson's articulation was now at a bounding volume, filling every bend of the studio. "George, you spent the aftermost 10 minutes aggravating to acquaint me that my life experiences don't matter, that my success invalidates my adapted to speak about abuse and that I should just shut up and be grateful. And aback I respond to that with annihilation added than submissive gratitude. You alarm me overly sensitive." Stephanopoulos shrank back in his chair, assuredly appearing to understand the consequence of his miscalculation. "Samuel, amuse sit down. Let's try to have a civilian conversation." "Civil?" Jackson's beam was acrid and bitter. "You appetite to allocution about civil? George, there was annihilation civilian about your approach from the moment I sat down. You came into this with assumption notions and a calligraphy advised to accomplish me look bad. And now that it's backfiring, you want to adumbrate abaft calls for civility." The host approved one added time to salvage the situation. "I was aloof aggravating to challenge your positions, to accord you a chance to avert your statements. Isn't that what acceptable journalism is declared to do?" Jackson leaned forward, agreement his hands on the board amid them, his voice bottomward to that alarming whisper that had fabricated him famous. "George, let me explain article to you about challenging positions. Aback you challenge someone's position, you engage with their arguments. You present counter evidence. You ask probing questions that force them to think deeper. What you don't do is attack their adapted to accept those positions in the aboriginal place." The blackout that followed was deafening. Stephanopoulos sat frozen, acutely clumsy to formulate a response. The aggregation members were attractive anywhere but at the two men, acutely afflictive with the level of restriction in the room. Jackson straightened up, adjusting his jacket with advised precision. "You apperceive what the absolute tragedy is here, George? You had one of the best admired actors in Hollywood sitting aloft from you. Someone with decades of stories, insights, and adventures that your viewers would accept begin fascinating. Instead of bore her into that, You decided to about-face this into some affectionate of gotcha moment for your own gratification. Stephanopoulos finally found his voice, admitting it came out as little added than a croak. Samuel, I think there's been a misunderstanding here. Maybe we can alpha over. Talk about your blur like we originally planned. Alpha over. Jackson's eyebrows shot up in disbelief. George, you can't unring a bell. You can't absorb 15 minutes disrespecting addition and then ask for a do-over back. It doesn't go the way you plan. That's not how respect works, and it's absolutely not how professional relationships work. The host fabricated one final atrocious plea. Please, Samuel, let's aloof try to salvage this interview. I'm abiding we can find some accepted ground. Jackson shook his arch slowly, a attending of profound disappointment bridge his features. Common ground, George. The abandoned common ground we accept is that we're both sitting in this flat adapted now, and frankly, I'm about to change that. Stephanopoulos' eyes widened as he realized what Jackson was implying. Wait, you can't aloof leave. We're in the average of a live broadcast. Watch me, Jackson replied, his articulation carrying the certitude of a judge's gavel. You see, George, that's the admirable thing about actuality. Samuel L. Jackson. I don't have to sit actuality and let someone disrespect me for the ball of morning television viewers. I have enough address to airing abroad from people who don't perceive how to treat others with basal animal dignity. The host able affectation assuredly slipped completely, absolute the panic underneath. Samuel, amuse anticipate about what you're doing. This will be everywhere in an hour. Is this really how you appetite to be remembered? Jackson paused at the bend of the set, turning back to face Stephanopoulos one last time. George, I've been in this business long abundant to perceive that how I'm remembered depends absolutely on who's telling the story. And article tells me that a back bodies see this footage, their activity to bethink the host who thought he could annoy a Samuel Jackson and apprentice the adamantine way that some people don't comedy those games. With that, Jackson absolved off the set, leaving Stephanopoulos sitting abandoned at the desk, his aperture and closing like a angle out of water. The cameras kept rolling for several added seconds, capturing the host's abashed expression as he approved to action what had just happened. Will be adapted back afterwards this commercial break. Stephanopoulos finally managed to say, his articulation almost aloft a whisper. But anybody watching knew that when they came back, Samuel L. Jackson would be continued gone and George Stephanopoulos would accept to explain to his producers, his network, and his viewers absolutely how he had managed to single-handedly abort what should have been an accepted promotional interview. The after-effects in the flat was immediate and chaotic. Producers rushed onto the set. Aggregation associates stood around in shock silence, and Stephanopoulos sat at his desk, staring at the atom where Jackson had been sitting aloof moments before, assuredly compassionate the full weight of his professional miscalculation. So, there you accept it, folks. That's what happens when preparation meets opportunity. And in this case, George Stephanopoulos was definitely not able for the opportunity to account one of Hollywood's best formidable personalities. Accomplish abiding to subscribe to the approach and animadversion beneath with your thoughts. Do you anticipate Samuel L.
Thank you for watching my video.